Bibliophiles of the Internet. My name is Adriana and today I'm here to bring you my February wrap-up. So today I'm going to share with you all of the books and comics, mostly comics, that I read in February. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The first book I completed in February was nonfiction, and that was for one of my classes, and that was Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. This is Frank McCourt's memoir, and it's all about how he was born into poverty here in America. And his family's financial issues only grow progressively worse and worse, and they keep having kids that they can't afford to support. So Frank's father decides to move the entire family to Ireland. That is where both of Frank's parents are from. That's where most of their family is, and they figure there will be work waiting for them when they get over there, but that is not the case, and they just sink even further into poverty. When I first started reading this book for class, I didn't think I was going to read the whole thing, but I ended up finding it really engaging. Specifically, I found the perspective through which Frank McCourt wrote this memoir to be really fascinating. Because obviously he's writing this memoir as an adult, but he's writing it through the perspective of child Frank, and he starts right at the beginning, so we don't know anything beyond what childhood Frank is experiencing. And I think it's so much more powerful that way because children don't really have a good understanding of poverty the same way that adults do. So since he kind of removed that adult perspective that he has and wrote it through the eyes of his childhood self, I think that was so much more interesting. So I ended up really enjoying this book. I loved the writing style. I loved the way this memoir was constructed, and I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I started reading one of my new favorite comics, and I read the first volume of East of West by Jonathan Hickman and Nick Dragotta. As I said in my February book haul, this is an apocalyptic Western. And I don't want to get too crazy with the synopsis, but basically it's about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and at least one of them is literally a cowboy. Obviously they are trying to bring about the apocalypse, that is what they do, but one of the 4 has gone rogue and is off on his own revenge mission. I'm kind of obsessed with Jonathan Hickman and Nick Dragotta's vision for the future and how effortlessly they blend these two genres that seem completely different from one another, and that is sci-fi and Western. The concept is amazing, the characters are dynamic, the dialogue is so sharp and smart and authentic. So in case you couldn't tell, I absolutely loved this volume, and I will link my Goodreads review down below if you want more information, but I gave this volume 5 out of 5 stars. After I completed that, I continued with my comic marathoning spree, and I finally read the last 3 volumes of Lock and Key by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. One of my good, lovely, generous friends from school, hi Steven, I know you're watching this video, was kind enough to lend me the last 3 volumes in this series, and I'm so grateful that he did, because honestly, if he didn't, I don't know when I would have finished this series otherwise. So I binge read these and I loved them so much. It's an amazing series overall. These final installments were some of my favorite in the entire series. Amazing character arcs and character development. It was very emotionally satisfying. I just think it's a really strong series overall. And then I read the 3rd book in the Raven cycle, which is Blue Lily, Lily Blue by Maggie Stiefvater. I think at this point you all know how much I love the Raven cycle. Like, my words cannot express how much respect I have for Maggie Stiefvater's incredible brain. I will say that now that I've read 3 of the books, I do see a sort of pattern developing, and I do see something that I do want to criticize. And that's the antagonists that crop up in every single one of the books, because it seems like there's a new one for every single book, but it's not even that. It's that they seem kind of comical and cliche. Personally, I can never bring myself to believe that any of the antagonistic characters that crop up in this series actually pose a viable threat. I just feel like the weight of the magic and the energy that the characters are facing and grappling with is so much more sinister than any of the antagonists. But even with that in mind, I still loved this installment so much and I really enjoyed it. The characters, like I said, are absolutely incredible. And so I ended up giving Blue Lily, Lily Blue 4 out of 5 stars. After I completed that, I remembered that it was Black History Month here in America in February, so I really wanted to read a book that either starred Black characters or was written by a Black author. So you know me, I was like, why not both? So I decided to read a memoir, and that was Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. This is, as I said, Jacqueline Woodson's memoir, and it's written entirely in verse. And it's no small feat to try and create a narrative through poetry, to establish distinct characters, to insert dialogue, to create an overarching plot. Those are not easy things to do, and I think she did a fantastic job of establishing all that and using the poems to further the story. I thought it was an excellent, well-crafted memoir, and I really enjoyed it, so I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Penultimately, I read another comic, and that was the first volume of Miss Marvel by G. Willow Wilson and Adrian Elfona. This comic was also lent to me by my friend from school. Hi, Steven. Thank you very much. I thought this volume was very powerful thematically because Kamala Khan is really struggling with how she thinks people will want to perceive her as a superhero, and how does she put her own spin on her superpowers, and how can she stay true to herself while facing other people's expectations. I thought it was relatively complex, at least thematically. I thought it was very entertaining, very fast-paced, and just a really great read overall, even if it wasn't like, oh my god, great, and even though it could have been even better. But I am very excited to continue on this series in the future, and I gave the first volume 4 stars. And the final thing I completed in February was the third book in the Heroes of Olympus series, The Mark of Athena by Rick Riordan. I'm just gonna start by saying that even though I really enjoy this series, and even though it's a really fantastic adventure story and it's very epic and full of action and some very compelling characters, I am not like Rick Riordan's #1 fan. To be honest, his writing style consistently leaves so much to be desired. Even though his books are marketed towards a younger audience, I find his writing to be needlessly expository. So much of what happens to the characters and what happens between the characters is just summarized or told, and I don't think that it's very compelling. And I've mentioned in videos past, not only with the Heroes of Olympus series, but also with the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, that the convenience in this series really bothers me as well. So when the characters are put in danger, and they're put in danger a lot, or when they're challenged, I just don't feel like that actually poses a real threat against them. It's to the point where there's this big plot twist at the end of this story, and it didn't even faze me. I just shrugged and was like, cool, that sounds interesting. Finally, we're getting somewhere. And not being able to worry for the characters or care if they're gonna come out of something unscathed kind of sucks the enjoyment out of it a little bit. So in the end, I gave The Mark of Athena 3.5 out of 5 stars. So for the most part, those were all of the books I read in February. As always, in the comments down below, please let me know what was the highlight of your reading month in February, or what are you looking forward to reading in March? And that is everything I had for this wrap up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye.